White royal guards mock newly recruited black royal guard. Few moments later, he saves the king. The king gasped, his face pale with fear, as the blade glinted in the flickering torchlight. Chaos erupted in the royal hall. Guards scattered, unsure whether to advance or retreat, as the assassin lunged forward. The crowd of nobles screamed, their expensive gowns sweeping the floor as they sought shelter behind marble pillars. At that moment, the newly recruited black royal guard sprang into action. His movements were swift, his instincts sharper than anyone could have imagined. With a resounding shout, he threw himself into the fray. The assassin's blade missed the king by a breath, clashing instead with the guard's sword in a shower of sparks. The hall fell silent as the black guard held his ground, his stance unyielding. The assassin snarled, realizing this was no ordinary recruit. A sudden flurry of strikes followed, a blur of motion that ended as the guard disarmed the attacker and subdued him with a final, decisive blow. The hall erupted in cheers, the king staring at the young man who had just saved his life. But not all eyes were filled with admiration. The other guards, clad in their spotless white uniforms, exchanged looks of disbelief. Just an hour ago, they had mocked him, laughed at his accent, and questioned why someone like him was even allowed to join the royal guards. The truth hung in the air like a bitter pill. Yet, as the crowd cheered and the king approached to thank him, the question remained, would this moment of triumph change their hearts, or would envy and prejudice prevail? 2 weeks earlier, the castle courtyard was alive with the sound of clashing swords and the barked orders of the royal captain. The newest recruit, a young man named Darius, stood at attention, his dark skin glistening under the midday sun. He wore the same uniform as the others, but it seemed to carry extra weight on him, as if the very fabric resisted being worn by someone like him. The other guards stood nearby, their white uniforms spotless, and their smug expressions even more so. One of them, a lanky man named Garrett, leaned over to his companion, snickering. "Look at him, trying to stand tall. Bet he's never held a sword before coming here," Garrett said. His friend, a burly guard named Victor, chuckled.
"He'll be gone in a week."
"Bet you 10 gold coins he doesn't last through training." Darius heard them but kept his gaze fixed on the captain. He had grown used to comments like these. Back home, he had faced worse. But this was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to prove himself. Yet, the whispers and the sneers made it clear that not everyone shared the king's vision of a diverse royal guard. The captain began the training session, ordering the recruits to form pairs for sparring. To no one's surprise, Garrett volunteered to face Darius, his smirk widening as he drew his sword. "Let's see what you've got, rookie," Garrett taunted. Darius nodded, gripping his sword tightly. The duel began, and Garrett came at him with an overconfident swing. Darius dodged, his movements quick and calculated. He had trained for this moment, though his path to learning had been unconventional, self-taught, with lessons gleaned from observing traveling mercenaries in his village. Garrett's attacks grew more aggressive, his frustration mounting as Darius evaded each strike. Finally, with a well-timed parry, Darius disarmed Garrett, sending his sword clattering to the ground. The courtyard fell silent, all eyes on the young blackguard who had just bested one of their own. The silence was broken by a slow clap. It came from Victor, who stepped forward, his face a mask of disdain. "Beginner's luck," he sneered, retrieving Garrett's sword and tossing it back to him. "Don't think for a second that you're one of us." Darius said nothing, though his grip tightened around his sword. He had won the duel, but the battle for acceptance had only just begun. The days that followed were grueling. Darius trained harder than anyone else, determined to earn his place despite the hostility of his peers. Each night, he replayed the jeers and insults in his mind, using them as fuel to push himself further. Yet, the loneliness weighed heavily on him. One evening, while practicing alone in the armory, he was approached by an older guard named Matthias. Unlike the others, Matthias treated Darius with respect. "Don't let them get to you," Matthias said, leaning on his sword. "You've got talent and they see it. That's why they're scared." Darius looked up surprised. "Scared? Of me?" Matthias nodded. Change frightens people, especially when it threatens the comfort of their little world. But the king chose you for a reason. Remember that. Darius felt a flicker of hope. Matthias's words stayed with him, a small light in the darkness of his struggles. The night of the attack came, without warning. The royal court had gathered for a grand feast, the air filled with laughter and the clinking of goblets. Darius was stationed near the entrance, his eyes scanning the room. Though the other guards avoided him, he remained focused on his duty. The first sign of trouble was subtle, a shadow slipping through the crowd, moving with purpose. Darius tensed, his instincts kicking in. He noticed the figure heading toward the king, a glint of steel flashing under the assassin's cloak. Darius shouted a warning, but the music and laughter drowned him out. Acting on pure instinct, he bolted forward, weaving through the startled guests. As the assassin drew his blade, Darius was already there, intercepting the attack in the nick of time. And now, as he stood victorious in the aftermath, the tension in the hall was palpable. The king's life had been saved, but the questions lingering in the minds of the guards loomed larger than ever. Was this the moment that would change everything? Or was it just the beginning of a new battle for Darius? The assassin's lifeless body was dragged out of the hall, leaving a trail of blood that glistened under the torchlight. Darius stood at attention, his chest heaving as he tried to process what had just happened. The royal guards, still stunned, shuffled awkwardly in their places. Some avoided looking at him, while others shot him glares that held more resentment than gratitude. The king approached, his face etched with both relief and curiosity. "You saved my life tonight," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "What is your name, soldier?" "Darius, your majesty," he replied, bowing his head. His heart pounded as the king studied him with a penetrating gaze. "Darius," the king repeated, nodding slowly. "You have shown remarkable courage. Your actions will not go unnoticed." Darius straightened, pride swelling in his chest. The murmurs of the crowd grew louder, some applauding while others whispered in hushed tones. But then, Garrett stepped forward, his face twisted with barely concealed disdain. "With all due respect, your majesty, we should investigate how this assassin got so close. Perhaps someone wasn't doing their job properly." The accusation was thinly veiled, and everyone in the room knew who Garrett was targeting. Darius felt a surge of anger, but kept his expression neutral. The king's eyes narrowed as he looked at Garrett. "You think this man, who just saved my life, is suspect?" the king asked, his tone dangerously quiet. Garrett hesitated, his confidence faltering. I only mean that we should be cautious, your majesty. After all, he's new here." The king raised a hand, silencing him. "Enough. Captain," he called, turning to the leader of the royal guard. "Ensure a full investigation is conducted, and see to it that Darius is rewarded for his bravery." The captain nodded, though his expression was unreadable. As the king exited the hall, flanked by his advisors, Darius felt the weight of 100 eyes on him. The murmurs continued as he left the room, his step steady despite the turmoil brewing around him. The barracks were eerily quiet that night. Darius sat on his cot, staring at the floor. The thrill of saving the king had been replaced by the cold realization that his actions had painted a target on his back. He could feel the hostility in the air, thick and suffocating. The door creaked open, and Matthias entered, carrying 2 mugs of ale. He handed one to Darius and sat down beside him. "Quite a night," Matthias said, taking a sip. "You handled yourself well." "Thank you," Darius replied, his voice low. "But not everyone sees it that way." Matthias chuckled, though there was no humor in it. "They're threatened. You've done more in one night than most of them have in their entire careers. And you did it with skill, not arrogance. That's what stings the most." Darius sighed. "I didn't do it for recognition. I just wanted to do my duty." "And you did," Matthias said firmly. "But duty doesn't always earn you friends. Stay sharp, Darius. This won't be the last time you'll have to prove yourself." The following days were a mixture of praise and suspicion. The king had publicly commended Darius during court, granting him a Medal of Valor and a promotion. Yet, within the ranks of the guards, the tension was palpable. Garrett and Victor, in particular, seemed to go out of their way to make his life difficult. During training, they paired him with the most difficult opponents, hoping to humiliate him. Yet, Darius met every challenge head-on, his determination unshakable. The other guards watched in silence, some beginning to respect him, while others grew more resentful. One afternoon, while sparring with Victor, the tension boiled over. Victor was larger and stronger, but Darius's speed and strategy kept him at bay. Frustrated, Victor swung his sword harder, his strikes wild and dangerous. Finally, he landed a blow that knocked Darius to the ground. "Maybe you're not as good as you think," Victor sneered, standing over him. Darius got to his feet, his jaw clenched. "I'm not here to prove anything to you," Victor smirked. "You think you're better than us, don't you? Just because you had one lucky night." Before Darius could respond, Matthias stepped between them. "That's enough," he said, his voice cold. "We're supposed to be a team, not enemies." Victor scoffed but backed off, his gaze still locked on Darius. "A team? With him? Don't make me laugh." That evening, as Darius walked back to his quarters, he noticed something unusual. The torches along the corridor flickered, as if disturbed by a draft. He slowed his pace, his instincts on high alert. The hallway was empty, but the silence felt unnatural. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, a blade glinting in their hand. Darius reacted instinctively, drawing his sword just in time to block the attack. The clang of metal echoed through the corridor as the assailant pressed forward. Darius recognized the style of the attacker. It was eerily similar to the assassin from the royal hall. His mind raced as he defended himself, trying to piece together the connection. Was this another attempt on the king's life? Or was it something more personal? The fight was intense, the narrow corridor leaving little room for error. Finally, with a well-timed maneuver, Darius disarmed the attacker and pinned them to the ground. As he tore off their hood, his breath caught in his throat. It was one of the guards. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. Someone from within their ranks had just tried to kill him.
But why?
And more importantly, how deep did this betrayal go? Darius's heart pounded as he looked into the guard's defiant eyes. The answers he needed were close, but he knew this was only the beginning of a far more dangerous game. The guard beneath Darius sneered, blood trickling from a cut above his brow. His defiant eyes revealed no hint of remorse, only unyielding hatred. Darius tightened his grip, pressing his knee against the guard's chest.
Who sent you?
Darius demanded, his voice low but firm. The guard chuckled bitterly. "You think I'd tell you? You don't belong here, and you never will." Darius felt a surge of anger, but kept his composure. He couldn't let this man's words distract him from the truth. "If I don't belong, why go to such lengths? What are you hiding?" The guard didn't respond, his silence more unnerving than his earlier defiance. Darius looked around, ensuring the corridor was still empty, before calling for reinforcements. Within moments, Matthias and another senior guard arrived, their expressions shifting from confusion to alarm when they saw the scene. "What in the king's name is going on here?" Matthias asked, rushing forward. Darius stood, keeping his sword pointed at the subdued guard.
"He attacked me."
"This wasn't random. He's part of something bigger." Matthias knelt, binding the guard's hands while the other guard kept watch. The subdued man didn't resist, his smirk never fading. "Take him to the dungeons," Matthias ordered the other guard, who hesitated briefly before complying. Once the attacker was out of sight, Matthias turned to Darius. "You've got a target on your back, lad. Whatever this is, it's not just about prejudice anymore." "I know," Darius said grimly. "But why would one of our own do this? And what does it have to do with the assassination attempt?" Matthias shook his head. "We'll find out. But you need to watch your back, Darius. The deeper this goes, the more dangerous it gets." The next day, whispers of the attack spread through the castle like wildfire. Many of the guards avoided Darius altogether, while a few cast him wary glances. Garrett and Victor, however, seemed more agitated than usual. Darius noticed their hushed conversations and the way they always seemed to stop talking whenever he walked by. During a strategy meeting with the royal captain, Darius couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The captain outlined new security measures in light of recent events, assigning roles with an air of urgency. When Darius's name came up, there was a noticeable tension in the room. "You'll be stationed near the treasury tonight," the captain said, his tone even. "We've had reports of unusual activity in that area." Darius nodded, but he couldn't ignore the suspicious looks exchanged between Garrett and Victor. As the meeting ended and the guards dispersed, Matthias approached him. "Be careful tonight," Matthias said in a low voice. "The treasury's an odd choice for someone with your skills. Feels like they're trying to keep you out of the way. You think it's deliberate?" Darius asked, frowning. Matthias nodded. "I don't trust it. Stay alert." That night, the castle was eerily quiet. Darius stood guard outside the treasury, the flickering torchlight casting long shadows across the stone walls. He felt the weight of Matthias's warning but remained focused, his eyes scanning the corridor for any signs of movement. Hours passed, and the stillness became almost suffocating. Just as he began to think the night would pass without incident, he heard a faint noise, a soft shuffle, barely audible. Darius gripped his sword and moved toward the sound, his senses on high alert. As he rounded a corner, he saw them. Two figures clad in dark cloaks, their faces obscured. They were crouched near the treasury door, working quickly to bypass the heavy lock. Darius didn't hesitate. "Stop," he shouted, his voice echoing through the corridor. The intruders sprang to their feet, drawing weapons as they turned to face him. One of them charged, a dagger glinting in the dim light. Darius parried the attack, his sword clashing against the smaller blade with a metallic ring. The second figure attempted to flank him, but Darius was too quick, using the momentum of his first strike to pivot and block the attack. The fight was fast and brutal. Darius's training and instincts guided him as he deflected blow after blow. Finally, with a swift maneuver, he disarmed one of the intruders, sending their dagger skidding across the floor. The other attacker hesitated, glancing at their fallen weapon, and Darius seized the opportunity. With a powerful strike, he forced them to retreat, pinning them against the wall. "Who sent you?" he demanded, his voice cold. The intruder laughed, a hollow, mirthless sound. "You're too late. The pieces are already in place." Before Darius could press further, a loud whistle echoed through the corridor. The sound startled him just long enough for the attackers to break free, disappearing into the shadows. Darius cursed under his breath, his heart racing as he realized they were gone. The treasury was untouched, but the cryptic warning lingered in his mind. What pieces? And what were they planning? The next morning, Darius reported the incident to the captain, who listened with a furrowed brow. Garrett and Victor stood nearby, their expressions unreadable as Darius recounted the encounter. "You're saying they mentioned a larger plan?" the captain asked. "Yes," Darius confirmed. "They said the pieces are already in place. We need to act quickly." The captain nodded, though his tone remained cautious. "We'll increase patrols and secure key areas. For now, focus on your duties." As Darius left the meeting, he couldn't shake the feeling that the captain was holding something back. The tension within the guard was growing, and it was becoming increasingly clear that not everyone could be trusted. Later that day, Darius approached Matthias, sharing his concerns. "Something's not right," he said. The captain didn't seem surprised by what I told him. Matthias frowned. "You think he knows more than he's letting on?" "I don't know," Darius admitted. "But I can't ignore it. The pieces they mentioned, whatever's coming, it's bigger than just me." Before Matthias could respond, a commotion erupted in the courtyard. Guards shouted, and the sound of clashing metal filled the air. Darius and Matthias rushed to the scene, their hearts pounding. As they arrived, they saw Victor engaged in a heated duel with another guard. Blood stained the ground, and the gathered crowd watched in stunned silence. It wasn't just a sparring match. This was a fight to the death. Darius pushed his way through the crowd, his mind racing. Why was Victor fighting one of his own? And what could have driven him to such violence? The answers were unclear, But one thing was certain. This was only the beginning of the chaos to come. Victor's blade clashed against the other guard's sword with a force that sent sparks flying. The crowd of royal guards watched in stunned silence, their faces a mixture of fear and fascination. Darius pushed his way to the front, his heart pounding as he tried to make sense of the chaos. The other guard, a younger recruit named Elias, was holding his own against Victor, but it was clear he was outmatched. Sweat dripped from his brow as he parried Victor's relentless strikes, his movements growing more desperate with each passing moment. "Stop this madness," Darius shouted, stepping forward. Victor ignored him, his face twisted in anger. With a powerful swing, he knocked Elias's sword from his hands, sending it skittering across the courtyard. Elias stumbled back, falling to the ground as Victor raised his blade for the final blow. Before Victor could strike, Darius acted. He drew his sword and stepped between them, blocking Victor's attack with a resounding clang. The force of the blow sent a jolt through his arms, but he held his ground. "Enough!" Darius yelled, his voice echoing through the courtyard. Victor's eyes burned with rage as he glared at Darius. "Get out of my way, rookie. This has nothing to do with you." "It has everything to do with me," Darius replied, his tone unwavering. "You're about to kill one of your own. Whatever this is, it ends now." The crowd murmured, their whispers growing louder as the tension in the air thickened. Victor stepped back, lowering his sword, but not sheathing it. "You don't understand," he said, his voice low. "He's a traitor." Elias, still on the ground, looked up in shock. "That's a lie," he protested. "I've done nothing wrong." Darius turned to Victor, his sword still at the ready. "If you have proof, bring it to the captain. This isn't how we handle things." Victor hesitated, his grip on his sword tightening. For a moment, it seemed like he might attack again. But then, with a frustrated growl, he sheathed his blade and stormed off, shoving his way through the crowd. Darius extended a hand to Elias, helping him to his feet. "Are you all right?" he asked. Elias nodded, though his face was pale. "Thank you." I don't know what came over him. One minute we were talking, and the next he was accusing me of treason. Darius's mind raced. This wasn't a simple argument, it was part of something bigger. Victor's actions were too extreme to be random, and the timing was too coincidental. Later that evening, Darius met with Matthias in the armory. The older guard's expression was grim as Darius recounted the events in the courtyard. "Victor's not the kind to lose his temper like that," Matthias said, pacing the room. "Something's got him rattled." "I think he knows more than he's letting on," Darius said. Elias said they were talking before the fight. "Maybe Victor learned something he didn't like." Matthias nodded. "We need to find out what's going on. If this is connected to the attack on you or the treasury incident, we're running out of time." Darius hesitated before speaking. "Do you think the captain is involved?" Matthias stopped pacing, his brow furrowed. "I don't know. But we can't rule anything out. Stay vigilant, Darius. And watch your back." The next few days were tense. Victor avoided Darius, his behavior growing increasingly erratic. Meanwhile, the captain announced that an official inquiry would be conducted into the courtyard incident. Darius noticed the way Garrett lingered near Victor, their conversations quiet but intense. Whatever they were discussing, it was clear they didn't want anyone else to hear. One night, unable to shake his suspicions, Darius decided to follow them. He kept a safe distance as Garrett and Victor slipped out of the barracks and into the castle's labyrinthine halls. The two men moved quickly, their footsteps echoing softly against the stone walls. They eventually stopped in an abandoned storeroom, their voices low but urgent. Darius crept closer, hiding behind a stack of crates as he strained to hear their conversation. "This is getting out of hand," Victor said, his voice tight with frustration. The plan was to keep things quiet. Now, everyone's on edge. "Relax," Garrett replied. "The pieces are still in place. We just need to stick to the timeline." Victor sighed. "And what about him? He's not supposed to be here. He's messing everything up." Darius's pulse quickened. He knew they were talking about him. Garrett's tone darkened. "He won't be a problem much longer. Trust me." Darius leaned in closer, desperate to hear more, but his foot brushed against a loose stone, sending it clattering across the floor. The noise echoed through the storeroom, and both men froze. "Did you hear that?" Victor asked, drawing his sword. Darius cursed silently, backing away as quietly as he could. But it was too late. Garrett moved toward the crates, his eyes narrowing as he spotted Darius. Well, Garrett said, a smirk spreading across his face. "Eavesdropping, are we?" Darius drew his sword, his heart pounding. "You're up to something. Tell me what it is." Garrett laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "You're not in a position to demand anything." Victor stepped forward, his expression conflicted. "Garrett, we can't let him leave." "Then we don't," Garrett replied, raising his sword. Before Darius could react, they attacked. The confined space made the fight chaotic and brutal. Darius fought with everything he had, his mind racing as he tried to fend off both men at once. The clash of steel echoed through the storeroom as sparks flew and crates splintered under the force of their strikes. Darius managed to land a blow on Victor, forcing him to retreat, but Garrett was relentless. His attacks were fast and precise, pushing Darius to his limits. Just when it seemed like Darius might gain the upper hand, Garrett feinted, his blade slicing through the air and cutting a shallow gash across Darius's arm. Pain shot through him, but he gritted his teeth and pressed on. The fight ended abruptly when a third voice rang out, sharp and commanding. "Stand down." All three men turned to see the captain standing in the doorway, flanked by several guards. His face was a mask of anger and suspicion. "What is going on here?" the captain demanded, his gaze shifting between Darius, Garrett, and Victor. Darius lowered his sword, blood dripping from his arm. "They're plotting something, Captain." "I heard them." Garrett and Victor exchanged a look, their faces pale. The captain's eyes narrowed as he gestured for his guards to seize them. "You two have a lot of explaining to do," the captain said coldly. As Garrett and Victor were escorted out, Darius felt a wave of relief, but it was short-lived. The captain turned to him, his expression unreadable. "You're not off the hook, Darius," he said. "We'll get to the bottom of this. And if you're hiding anything, I'll find out." Darius nodded, his mind racing. The captain's intervention had stopped the fight, but the truth was still out of reach. And he knew this was only the beginning of a much larger battle. The dungeons were cold and damp, the air thick with the smell of mold and iron. Garrett and Victor sat chained to opposite walls, their faces shadowed by the dim torchlight. Darius stood outside the cell, his injured arm hastily bandaged, as the captain interrogated the two men. The tension in the room was suffocating, each second dragging like an eternity. "Why did you attack him?" the captain demanded, his voice sharp and unrelenting. Garrett smirked but said nothing. Victor, however, shifted uncomfortably, his gaze darting between Garrett and the captain. "It wasn't an attack," Victor finally muttered. "It was a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" The captain's voice dripped with skepticism. "You're lying. I heard Darius's report. You were plotting something, and I want to know what it is." Garrett's smirk faded, replaced by a cold glare. "You're wasting your time. You wouldn't understand even if we told you." The captain stepped closer, his face inches from Garrett's. "Try me." But Garrett remained silent, his defiance unshaken. The captain turned to Victor, his expression hard. "What about you? Are you willing to throw your life away for whatever this is?" Victor hesitated, his lips parting as if to speak, but a sharp look from Garrett stopped him. The room fell silent, the only sound the distant drip of water echoing through the stone corridors. "Fine," the captain said, stepping back. "If you won't talk, you'll stay here until you do?" He turned to Darius, his expression unreadable. "Come with me." As they left the dungeons, the captain walked in silence, his steps heavy against the stone floor. Darius followed, his mind racing with unanswered questions. Finally, the captain stopped in a quiet corridor, turning to face him. "You've caused quite a stir since you arrived," the captain said, his tone even but laced with suspicion. "I didn't ask for this," Darius replied. "But I'm not going to stand by while people conspire against the king." The captain studied him for a moment before nodding. I believe you're telling the truth. But that doesn't mean you're safe. Whoever is behind this has roots deeper than we thought. Darius frowned. Do you think Garrett and Victor are working alone? The captain shook his head.
No.
Their behavior doesn't add up. They're pawns in a larger game, but the question is, whose? The weight of the captain's words settled over Darius like a heavy cloak. He had suspected there was more to the conspiracy, but hearing it confirmed made the threat feel even more real. That night, Darius couldn't sleep. He lay on his cot, staring at the ceiling as the events of the past weeks played over in his mind. Every encounter, every fight, every cryptic comment, it all felt like pieces of a puzzle he couldn't quite assemble. A soft knock on the door jolted him from his thoughts. He sat up, his hand instinctively reaching for his sword. Who is it? He called softly. It's me, came Matthias's voice. Let me in. Darius opened the door, and Matthias slipped inside, his expression grim. He carried a rolled-up piece of parchment, which he handed to Darius. I found this in Victor's quarters, Matthias said. It's a map of the castle. Look at the markings. Darius unrolled the map, his eyes narrowing as he examined it. Several areas were circled, including the treasury, the royal chambers, and the armory. But what caught his attention most was a series of arrows pointing to a hidden passageway that led straight to the king's private quarters. They've been planning this for weeks, Darius murmured, his stomach twisting.
This isn't just about me.
They're going after the king again. Matthias nodded. We need to act fast. If they have people on the outside, or worse, within our ranks, we can't trust anyone. Darius's mind raced as he tried to formulate a plan. We need to secure the king and block off the passageways. And we need to do it without tipping off whoever's involved. Agreed, Matthias said. But we'll need proof to convince the captain. I'll handle that, Darius said, his voice steady. But if we fail, this could be the end for both of us. Matthias placed a hand on his shoulder. Then we won't fail. The next day, Darius approached the captain with a map, his explanation concise but urgent. The captain's eyes widened as he studied the parchment, his expression shifting from disbelief to alarm. This changes everything. We'll need to double the guard and secure all entrances to the king's chambers. I'll take the hidden passage, Darius said. If they're planning another attack, that's where they'll strike. The captain hesitated before nodding.
Fine.
But take Matthias with you. I won't have you facing this alone. As night fell, Darius and Matthias positioned themselves near the hidden passageway. The air was thick with anticipation, every creak and whisper of the castle magnified in the silence. Hours passed, and just as doubt began to creep in, they heard it, the faint sound of footsteps echoing through the narrow tunnel. Darius signaled to Matthias, his heart pounding as they drew their swords. The footsteps grew louder, and soon, shadows emerged from the darkness. There were 3 of them, their faces obscured by masks. Now, Darius whispered. They sprang from their hiding place, their swords flashing in the dim light. The intruders were caught off guard, but they recovered quickly, drawing their weapons as a fierce battle erupted. The confined space made every move critical, every mistake deadly. Darius fought with everything he had, his movements precise and controlled. He disarmed one attacker, sending them sprawling to the ground, while Matthias held off the others. But the intruders were skilled, their strikes fast and brutal. Just as Darius thought they might gain the upper hand, one of the masked men threw a small, spherical object to the ground. A blinding flash filled the tunnel, followed by a thick cloud of smoke. Darius coughed, his vision blurred as the intruders retreated into the darkness. When the smoke cleared, Darius and Matthias were alone. The passageway was empty, but the implications were clear. The attack wasn't over. It had only just begun. The smoke clung to the air, swirling in the dim torchlight as Darius and Matthias caught their breath. The retreating footsteps of the intruders faded, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. We lost them, Matthias said, frustration tightening his voice. Darius sheathed his sword, his mind racing. They won't give up. That was just a probe to test our defenses. The real attack is coming. Matthias nodded grimly. Then we need to warn the captain and secure the king immediately. Without wasting a moment, they hurried back through the narrow passage, their boots echoing against the stone floor. As they emerged into the main corridors of the castle, Darius felt an oppressive weight settle over him. Whoever these attackers were, they had planned meticulously, and they were still one step ahead. In the Royal Guard's war room, the captain listened intently as Darius and Matthias recounted the events in the tunnel. The map lay spread out on the table, its markings now a glaring reminder of the looming danger. "They're testing us," Darius said. "They know we're onto them, but they're still moving forward. We need to act now before it's too late." The captain's jaw tightened. "We'll secure all access points to the king's chambers and increase patrols throughout the castle. No one gets in or out without my approval." "What about the hidden passage?" Matthias asked. "They've used it before. They might try again." The captain nodded. "I'll assign a team to guard it. But I want you two stationed outside the king's chambers tonight. If they're bold enough to strike, they'll aim for the heart of the castle." Darius and Matthias exchanged a glance, both understanding the gravity of the task. The captain was trusting them with the king's life, a responsibility that left no room for error. The night was unnervingly quiet as Darius and Matthias took their positions outside the king's chambers. The grand hallways of the royal wing, usually bustling with activity, now felt like a tomb. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind outside set their nerves on edge. Hours passed in tense silence, their senses sharp and alert. Darius's mind wandered back to the attacker's words. "The pieces are already in place." What pieces? And how far did this conspiracy reach? Suddenly, a faint sound broke through the silence, a low rumble, barely perceptible. Matthias stiffened, his hand instinctively reaching for his sword. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. Darius nodded, his heart pounding. The sound grew louder, echoing through the corridor. It was coming from the direction of the throne room. "Stay here," Darius said. "If this is a distraction, they might still come for the king. And if it's not?" Matthias asked, his voice tense. Darius hesitated. "Then I'll handle it." Before Matthias could protest, Darius moved quickly and silently toward the source of the noise. His steps were measured, his sword drawn and ready. As he approached the throne room, the sound became clearer, like grinding stone and muffled voices. When he reached the grand doors of the throne room, he pushed them open just enough to peer inside. What he saw made his blood run cold. A group of masked figures was gathered around the base of the throne, their hands working feverishly to dismantle the marble steps. Behind them, a larger figure, clearly their leader, stood with arms crossed, barking orders in a language Darius didn't recognize. But it wasn't the destruction of the throne that sent chills down his spine. It was what lay beneath it. The intruders had uncovered a hidden vault, its heavy iron door slightly ajar. From his vantage point, Darius could see faintly glowing symbols carved into the door, pulsing with an unnatural light. What are they after? He wondered, his grip tightening on his sword. He knew he couldn't take them all on alone, but he couldn't risk letting them finish whatever they were doing. Steeling himself, he pushed the doors open and stepped into the room. "Stop right there," he commanded, his voice echoing through the cavernous space. The intruders turned in unison, their faces obscured by their masks. The leader stepped forward, his towering frame imposing even from a distance. "So, the little hero shows himself," the leader said, his voice deep and mocking. "You're too late. The king's precious secrets will soon be ours." Darius pointed his sword at the leader. "Not if I can help it." The leader laughed, a hollow, menacing sound. "Brave words. Let's see if your skill matches your courage." With a flick of his hand, the leader signaled to the others, who charged at Darius with weapons drawn. Darius braced himself, his mind racing as he calculated his odds. The room was spacious, but the scattered debris and narrow pathways limited his movement. He would have to fight smart, not just hard. The first attacker lunged at him, their blade aiming for his chest. Darius sidestepped the strike, countering with a quick slash that sent the attacker sprawling. Another came at him from the side, but he parried their strike, using the momentum to pivot and knock them off balance. The fight was chaotic, each movement a blur of steel and sweat. Darius's training and instincts carried him through, but he could feel himself tiring. The attackers fought with a reckless ferocity, each one seemingly more determined than the last. Finally, as he disarmed the last of the attackers, the leader stepped forward, slow and deliberate. He drew a massive sword from his back, its blade etched with the same glowing symbols as the vault. "You've done well," the leader said, his voice dripping with disdain. "But this is where your story ends." Darius tightened his grip on his sword, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He knew this would be his toughest fight yet. But as he stared into the leader's cold, unyielding eyes, he made a silent vow. No matter the cost, he would protect the king. The leader charged, his blade slicing through the air with terrifying speed. Darius barely managed to block the strike, the force of the blow sending a shockwave through his arms. The clash of their swords echoed like thunder, each strike more ferocious than the last. As the fight raged on, Darius began to notice something strange. The symbols on the leader's sword seemed to pulse in rhythm with his movements, as if guiding his strikes. Darius's mind raced as he tried to decipher the connection. Was the sword enchanted? And if so, how could he counter it? Suddenly, the leader fainted, his blade slicing across Darius's side. Pain shot through him, but he gritted his teeth and pressed on. He couldn't afford to lose, not here, not now. With a surge of determination, Darius lunged forward, his sword aimed for the leader's chest. But the leader parried the strike with ease, knocking Darius off balance. As he raised his blade for the killing blow, the ground beneath them trembled, a deep rumble that shook the entire room. Both men froze, their eyes drawn to the vault. The glowing symbols had grown brighter, their light pulsating with an almost frantic energy. The iron door began to creak open, revealing a swirling vortex of light and shadow within. The leader's expression shifted from triumph to fear. "No," he muttered, stepping back. "It's too soon." Darius took the opportunity to strike, his blade slicing across the leader's arm. The man roared in pain, dropping his sword as he stumbled away from the vault. Before Darius could press his advantage, the vortex erupted, a blinding light filling the room. The force of the explosion sent him sprawling to the ground, his vision swimming as the world around him descended into chaos. Darius's ears rang as he blinked against the swirling chaos of light and shadow erupting from the vault. He struggled to his feet, clutching his side where the leader's blade had cut him. The room was unrecognizable, walls cracked, marble steps shattered, and debris strewn everywhere. The vortex pulsed, releasing waves of energy that knocked over anyone who got too close. The leader, clutching his wounded arm, staggered toward the vault, his face a mask of desperation. "You fool," he shouted at Darius. "You've doomed us all. Do you even know what you've unleashed?" Darius steadied himself, his sword trembling in his hand. "Whatever this is, you're the one who tried to open it. Now tell me what's happening before it consumes us." The leader sneered, though his bravado was clearly shaken. "It's the king's greatest secret, a weapon of unimaginable power. He hid it here, fearing what it could do. And now, thanks to you, it's waking up." Before Darius could respond, the vortex surged again, sending a burst of wind and energy through the room. Several of the masked attackers, still groaning on the floor, were swept up into the swirling light, their screams echoing as they disappeared. "Run," the leader shouted, his voice panicked. He turned and bolted toward the exit, leaving Darius alone to face the chaos. Darius hesitated, torn between chasing the leader and containing whatever was coming from the vault. He glanced back at the vortex, its pulsing light growing brighter with each passing second. A low, guttural sound began to emanate from its depths, like the growl of some immense, otherworldly creature. The king. He had to protect the king. Gritting his teeth, Darius sprinted from the throne room, the ground shaking beneath his feet as the vortex continued to grow. He tore through the castle corridors, his breath ragged as he reached the royal chambers. Matthias was already on high alert, his sword drawn. "What happened?" Matthias asked, his eyes wide with alarm. No time to explain, Darius said, his voice urgent. We need to secure the king. There's something alive in that vault. As if on cue, a deafening roar echoed through the castle, followed by another tremor that knocked both men off their feet. Darius scrambled to his knees, his heart racing as the sound grew louder. Whatever was in that vault was no longer contained. The doors to the king's chambers burst open, and the captain emerged, his face pale but resolute. What's going on? He demanded. The vault beneath the throne room. It's been opened, Darius said, pulling himself upright. There's something inside, and it's coming this way. The captain's expression darkened. We need to move the king to the safe room immediately. As the captain barked orders, a group of guards rushed to the king's side, escorting him through a hidden passage. Darius and Matthias took up defensive positions at the entrance to the royal chambers, their swords ready. The ground trembled again, this time accompanied by the sound of something massive moving through the castle. It wasn't just the weight of footsteps, it was the unnatural scraping of claws against stone, the sound of a creature too large and too alien to belong in this world. Do you hear that? Matthias asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Darius nodded, his grip tightening on his sword. Whatever it is, it's coming straight for us. The corridor ahead was shrouded in shadow, the flickering torchlight doing little to pierce the darkness. And then it appeared. A monstrous figure emerged from the gloom, its form both terrifying and incomprehensible. It was taller than any man, its body a shifting mass of light and shadow, with limbs that seemed to stretch and retract as it moved. Its eyes glowed with a fierce, otherworldly light, and its mouth, if it could be called that, was filled with jagged, shifting teeth. The guards who had remained at the entrance froze, their weapons shaking in their hands. One of them broke ranks, turning to flee, but the creature moved with impossible speed. It lunged forward, its claws raking through the air and catching the fleeing guard. The man's scream was cut short as he was lifted into the air and thrown against the wall. Hold your ground, the captain shouted, though his voice wavered. Darius didn't hesitate. He charged at the creature, his sword raised high. It turned toward him, its glowing eyes locking onto him with a piercing intensity. As he swung his blade, the creature lashed out with one of its shifting limbs, deflecting the attack with an ease that sent Darius reeling. Matthias joined the fight, his strikes fast and precise, but the creature seemed to anticipate every move. It swatted him aside like a ragdoll, sending him crashing into a nearby column. Darius rushed to his side, helping him to his feet. We can't fight this thing, Matthias said, his voice strained. Not like this. Then we hold it off, Darius said, determination hardening his voice. We have to give the king time to escape. The creature roared again, the sound reverberating through the castle. It advanced slowly, its glowing eyes fixed on them as if savoring the hunt. Darius gritted his teeth, stepping forward to face it once more. But before he could strike, the creature froze. Its head tilted slightly, as if listening to something only it could hear. Then, without warning, it turned and bolted down the corridor, its massive form disappearing into the shadows. What just happened? Matthias asked, his voice filled with disbelief. I don't know, Darius said, lowering his sword. But whatever it's after, it's not us. The realization hit him, like a punch to the gut. The creature was heading for the safe room. The king, Darius said, his voice barely above a whisper. It's going after the king. Without waiting for a response, he took off down the corridor, his mind racing. He had faced assassins, conspiracies, and prejudice, but this was something far beyond anything he had ever imagined. Whatever that creature was, it wasn't of this world, and it wasn't going to stop until it reached its target. Darius's heart raced as he sprinted down the corridors, the weight of the situation bearing down on him like a heavy cloak. Matthias was right behind him, his breath ragged as they pushed forward. The castle seemed to stretch endlessly before them, the once familiar hallways now full of shadows and uncertainty. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant sound of the creature's movements made them more aware of the danger closing in on them. The king is in the safe room, Darius muttered to himself. He's the only thing standing between that creature and the rest of the kingdom. We won't let that thing get to him, Matthias said, his voice filled with resolve. As they turned a corner, the sounds of the creature's growls echoed through the halls. Darius quickened his pace, adrenaline surging through his veins. He could feel the walls of the castle closing in, but the thought of the king's safety drove him forward. He had no idea what this creature was, but he was certain it wasn't here by accident. They finally reached the hidden door to the safe room, but when Darius tried to open it, he was met with resistance. Someone had barricaded it from the inside. Damn it! Darius cursed under his breath. The king is trapped. Matthias rushed to help, and together they began to force the door open. The heavy oak door groaned and creaked, but it wouldn't budge. Just as they were about to give it another attempt, the sound of footsteps behind them stopped them cold. A dark silhouette appeared in the hallway, one they knew all too well. It was the captain. "Get back!" Darius yelled, fearing that the captain had come to stop them. The last thing they needed now was another roadblock. The captain raised a hand, signaling them to calm down. "I'm not here to stop you," he said, his voice unusually calm, but tinged with worry. "We need to move quickly. That thing is almost here." Without further hesitation, he stepped forward, his expression grim. "You two are the only ones fast enough to reach the king. I'll hold off the creature as long as I can." Darius looked at Matthias, who nodded in silent agreement. Without another word, they pushed forward, determined to break into the safe room before it was too late. The captain was right. They were the only ones who could reach the king in time. The creature's footsteps were growing louder, closer. With every second that passed, the danger to the king intensified. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Darius and Matthias managed to break through the door's barricade. It gave way with a deafening crash, and the two men burst into the safe room, their eyes quickly scanning the dimly lit space. The king was there, seated at a wooden table, surrounded by his most trusted advisors, their faces pale with fear. They had clearly been waiting for this moment, but no one was prepared for the chaos that was about to unfold. "Your Majesty," Darius shouted, rushing toward the king. "We don't have much time. There's a creature in the castle, and it's headed straight for you." The king's eyes widened in disbelief. "A creature? What are you talking about?" "There's no time to explain," Matthias said urgently. "We need to move now." Darius stepped forward, reaching for the king's arm to help him up. But as his fingers brushed the king's sleeve, a piercing roar filled the air, shaking the castle to its core. The walls trembled beneath their feet as a bone-chilling growl echoed from the hallway. The creature had arrived. Darius's pulse quickened. "Stay close, Your Majesty," he said, his voice firm. "We'll get you out of here." But before they could make a move, the door to the safe room slammed open with terrifying force. The creature's massive form filled the doorway, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. It snarled, its jaws snapping as it advanced. "Move," Darius shouted, pushing the king and his advisors toward the far wall. Matthias stepped forward, positioning himself between the king and the creature. Darius drew his sword, preparing for the fight of his life. The creature hissed, its body writhing in an eerie, unnatural manner. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, a being of darkness and light, a force of pure destruction. "You'll never leave this place alive," the creature growled in a voice that sent chills down Darius's spine. "The king's blood is mine." Darius's grip tightened on his sword. He didn't know if he could defeat this thing, but he had no choice. The fate of the king, and possibly the kingdom, rested in his hands. Matthias lunged at the creature, aiming for its side, but the beast swiped a massive claw at him, knocking him across the room. Darius rushed forward, using the moment of distraction to strike. His blade connected with the creature's flesh, but the impact was far less than he had hoped. The sword simply slid off, as though the creature's skin was impervious to steel. The beast hissed in pain, but it quickly turned its wrath on Darius. It lashed out, its claws raking across his chest. The force of the blow sent him crashing into a nearby table, splintering wood and knocking the breath out of him. Through the pain, Darius scrambled to his feet.
He couldn't afford to be weak.
He had to keep fighting. But the creature was too powerful. It moved with an inhuman speed, dodging their attacks with ease. Every time Darius thought he might land a blow, the creature was already one step ahead, its glowing eyes always fixed on him, as though toying with him. Darius felt his strength beginning to wane. His body was battered, his blood staining the floor beneath him.
He had to do something.
But what? Suddenly, he remembered the map, the one with the markings beneath the throne room, the symbols that had been etched into the vault door. The creature had been linked to those markings. It wasn't just any beast, it was part of something bigger, something ancient. With his mind racing, Darius realized that if he could reach the source of the creature's power, he might be able to stop it. But first, he had to get past the creature's defenses. Matthias. Darius called, trying to keep the creature distracted. The markings. We need to find the source of its power. Matthias, barely able to stand, nodded weakly. I'll cover you. You go. Darius didn't hesitate. He darted toward the exit, hoping the king and his advisors were safe behind Matthias's protection. As he reached the hallway, he heard the sound of the creature's roars grow fainter. But he didn't stop. His mission was clear. If he didn't stop the creature now, it would be the end of them all. Darius sprinted through the darkened halls, his breath ragged and his body screaming in pain. Every step felt heavier than the last, but his mind was focused on one goal: finding the source of the creature's power. If the glowing symbols in the vault were connected to it, then they might hold the key to defeating it. The castle trembled again, and a distant roar sent chills down his spine. He had left Matthias behind to protect the king, a decision that weighed heavily on him, but there was no time to second-guess. The fate of everyone in the castle depended on him. The throne room was eerily quiet when he arrived. The destruction from earlier remained untouched: shattered marble steps, debris scattered across the floor, and the faint hum of energy from the glowing symbols on the vault door. The vortex was still active, though smaller and less chaotic than before. It pulsed steadily, like a heartbeat, and the air around it crackled with energy. Darius approached cautiously, his sword drawn. He studied the symbols, their glowing patterns shifting in a way that seemed almost alive. The closer he got, the more he could feel the energy radiating from the vault. It was ancient and overwhelming, like standing too close to a raging fire. He reached out hesitantly, his fingers brushing against the edge of the symbols. A sudden surge of energy shot through him, and his vision blurred. For a moment, he was no longer in the throne room. He was standing in a vast, desolate landscape, the sky above him swirling with dark clouds. In the distance, he saw a massive, shadowy figure. The creature, its glowing eyes locked onto him. A voice echoed in his mind, deep and commanding. You have awakened the Keeper. Its hunger cannot be sated. The king's blood is the key. Darius staggered back, his vision snapping back to reality. The symbols pulsed more urgently now, as if reacting to his presence. He realized the voice had confirmed his fears. The creature wasn't just a mindless beast. It was a guardian of something far greater, something the king had tried to hide.
But why?
What was so important that it required a creature like this to protect it? Darius didn't have time for answers. He needed to act. He scanned the symbols again, searching for anything that might give him an advantage. His eyes fell on a single, faintly glowing mark near the base of the vault door, a symbol that didn't match the others. It was smaller, more intricate, and seemed to pulse out of sync with the rest. He reached for it, his fingers trembling. As he touched the symbol, the pulsing light of the vault dimmed, and the vortex began to shrink. The energy in the room shifted, becoming more focused, as if the vault was responding to his touch. But before he could do anything else, the creature's roar shook the castle. Darius turned to see the beast standing in the doorway, its glowing eyes locked onto him. It snarled, its body shifting and writhing as it advanced. You shouldn't have come here, it growled, its voice filled with malice. The king's secrets are not yours to uncover. Darius raised his sword, his heart pounding. Whatever you're protecting, it's putting everyone in danger. I can't let you continue. The creature laughed, a guttural, hollow sound. You think you can stop me? You are nothing but a fragile, fleeting thing. I have existed for centuries. I am eternal. The beast lunged, its claws slicing through the air. Darius dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the attack. He rolled to his feet and swung his sword, the blade glancing off the creature's shifting form. It roared in frustration, swiping at him again with its massive claws. Darius dodged and weaved, his movements precise but desperate. He couldn't fight this thing head-on, it was too powerful. He needed a plan. His eyes darted back to the vault door, the faintly glowing symbol still pulsing in the corner. It had reacted to his touch before. Maybe it was the key. Summoning all his courage, Darius turned and sprinted toward the vault. The creature roared in fury, charging after him. He reached the glowing symbol just as the beast's claws raked the air inches from his back. Without hesitation, he pressed his hand firmly against the mark. The reaction was instantaneous. The vault door glowed with an intense light, and the creature howled in pain. Its form began to shift and contort, as if the energy from the vault was tearing it apart. The pulsing symbols on its body flickered erratically, and its glowing eyes dimmed. No, it roared, its voice filled with anguish. You don't understand. You're destroying everything. Darius gritted his teeth, his hand still pressed against the symbol. Then tell me how to stop this. The creature staggered back, its body writhing in agony. The king, he must reveal the truth. Before Darius could ask what it meant, the creature let out one final, deafening roar. Its body disintegrated into a swirl of light and shadow, which was pulled into the shrinking vortex. The room fell silent, the hum of energy fading as the vault door returned to its dormant state. Darius collapsed to his knees, his body trembling with exhaustion. The creature was gone, but its final words echoed in his mind. The king must reveal the truth. What truth? What had the king hidden that was worth unleashing such destruction? And why was it tied to the creature's existence? Darius knew his task wasn't over. He had stopped the immediate threat, but the larger mystery remained. Whatever the king was hiding, it was time for answers. Darius stumbled through the castle corridors, his body aching and his mind swirling with questions. The creature was gone, but the cryptic warning it had given him lingered like a shadow. The king must reveal the truth. He reached the royal chambers, where Matthias and the captain were still holding their positions. Matthias's face lit up with relief when he saw Darius, but the exhaustion in his eyes mirrored Darius's own. You're alive, Matthias said, helping him steady himself. What happened? It's gone, Darius replied, his voice hoarse. The creature, it's been pulled back into the vault. But it said something before it disappeared. What did it say? The captain asked, stepping closer. Darius hesitated, his gaze flicking to the king, who was seated in the corner of the room, surrounded by his advisors. The old man looked shaken but unharmed, his eyes meeting Darius's with a mix of gratitude and apprehension. It said that the king must reveal the truth, Darius said, his voice steady despite the weight of his words. Whatever was in that vault, it wasn't just a weapon or a secret. It's tied to you, your majesty. The room fell silent. The king's advisors exchanged uneasy glances, their expressions betraying their discomfort. The captain's face hardened, his eyes narrowing as he turned to the king. Your majesty, the captain said, his voice calm but firm. What is he talking about? What truth? The king sighed heavily, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of the entire kingdom rested on them. You have done well, Darius, he said, his voice low. But there are some truths that should never see the light of day. With all due respect, your majesty, Darius said, stepping forward. That creature didn't think so. Whatever you're hiding, it nearly destroyed the castle, and it would have killed you if we hadn't stopped it. We deserve to know the truth. The king looked away, his hands trembling. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he nodded. Very well, he said, his voice heavy with resignation. You deserve to know. He gestured for his advisors to leave the room, and they filed out reluctantly, their faces pale. Once the door closed, the king turned to the remaining guards, his expression somber. What I am about to tell you has been a closely guarded secret for generations, he began. It is a truth that my ancestors swore to protect, even at the cost of their lives. Darius and Matthias exchanged a glance, their anticipation mounting. The captain remained silent, his arms crossed as he waited for the king to continue. Centuries ago, the king said, "Our kingdom was on the brink of annihilation. A powerful enemy had risen, one that no army could defeat. Desperate for salvation, the ruling king at the time turned to forbidden magic that summoned the keeper." The creature, Matthias said, his voice barely above a whisper. The king nodded.
Yes.
The keeper was not of this world. It was a being of immense power, bound by a pact to protect the kingdom. But such power came at a price. The keeper demanded blood, a sacrifice from the royal bloodline, to maintain its loyalty. My ancestor agreed, believing it was the only way to save the kingdom. Darius's stomach churned. And that pact still stands? The king nodded again, his face etched with regret. The keeper was bound to the vault beneath the throne room, where it would remain dormant until called upon. But the magic that binds it is unstable. If the conditions of the pact are not met, the keeper awakens, and it will stop at nothing to claim what it is owed. Darius clenched his fists. So that's why it was after you. It wanted your blood. Yes, the king said quietly. And it would have taken it had you not intervened. The room fell silent, the weight of the revelation pressing down on them. Darius's mind raced as he tried to make sense of it all. The king's secret had nearly destroyed the kingdom, and yet he had kept it hidden, even from his closest advisors. What happens now? Matthias asked, his voice tinged with unease. The keeper is gone. But for how long? The king sighed. The keeper has been returned to the vault, but its bindings are weaker than ever. Without another sacrifice, it will awaken again, and the next time, it may not stop with me. Darius felt a surge of anger. So you're saying this cycle will continue, over and over, unless someone from your bloodline dies? That's no way to rule a kingdom. The king looked at him, his expression weary. Do you think I don't know that? Do you think I haven't spent every moment of my reign searching for another way? But the magic is ancient, and the keeper is beyond my control. There is no other way. Darius stepped closer, his voice firm. There has to be. That creature said, "You must reveal the truth." Maybe the answer lies in the past, in the original pact. If we can find out how your ancestor bound the keeper, we might be able to break the cycle. The king stared at him, hope flickering in his eyes for the first time. You believe it can be done? Darius nodded. I don't know how, but I'm willing to try. We've already come this far. If there's a way to free the kingdom from this curse, we owe it to everyone to find it. The king straightened, his resolve returning. Very well. The answers may lie in the royal archives, but they are heavily guarded. Only a select few have ever been granted access. Then grant it to us, Matthias said. If there's even a chance we can stop this, we need to take it. The king hesitated before nodding. You have my permission. But be warned, the archives are vast, and the knowledge they contain is dangerous. You will find answers, yes, but you may not like what you uncover. Darius exchanged a glance with Matthias, both men understanding the risks. We'll do what we have to, Darius said. For the kingdom. The king rose to his feet, his gaze steady. Then go. The fate of the kingdom rests in your hands now. As Darius and Matthias prepared to leave, the weight of their mission settled over them. They had faced assassins, conspiracies, and even an otherworldly creature, but the real battle was just beginning. If they failed, the keeper would return, and the kingdom would face a reckoning like no other. But for the first time, Darius felt a spark of hope. The truth was out, and with it came the possibility of breaking the cycle. Together, they would uncover the secrets of the past and forge a new future, one free from the shadow of the keeper.